Welcome, listeners, to the next episode of JLL's Perspectives Podcast. Today, we're talking about sustainability in office assets and looking at some research that we have updated since our 2023 report called the Early Mover Advantage. I have two guests with me. I have Connor McCauley, the head of sustainability at JLL, a sustainability and real estate expert with nearly 20 years' experience. Connor has advised clients across the EMEA and APAC region and worked in London's JLL office for 2015 through to 2020. His key focus is ensuring that our clients understand the current and emerging ESG trends, regulation and strategies that can impact their real estate operations and investments.
Thanks, Annabel. Nice to be here.
Terrific. Charlotte Stratton. Charlotte is the head of leasing and asset management workplace at Lendlease, a real estate investment expert with nearly 30 years experience. She has led large-scale pre-commitment leasing and asset repositioning across the Australian market and is known for her strategic investment expertise, negotiating skills and thought leadership on workplace innovation. Welcome, Charlotte.
Hello. Great to be here.
Right, so I'm Annabel McFarlane. I'm the head of strategic research for JLL, and we have been working on some research which updates and takes the report that we did in 2023 to the next level. It was called the Early Mover Advantage, and it's about assessing the demand for sustainable office assets and looking at what the supply side looks like. So, and we'll unpack a few of the themes that this research brought out last time and is now bringing out this time. I think the first thing that we're finding in the data this time is that there are more companies that occupy our office assets in Melbourne, Sydney, and Canberra that have net zero targets. And that's been very interesting. There are more than there were in 2023. So, all right, let's kick off with one of the first questions. In our 2023 study, we saw strong momentum in sustainability commitments. What has changed in occupier demand since then? So, Connor, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. Since 2023, we have seen an increase in occupier demand. I'd say that's driven by a few different factors. First of all, the number of companies globally that have committed to science-based targets has increased exponentially. We've got about over 7,500 companies now with those commitments, and I think that's doubled in the last couple of years. So above and beyond that, there's a lot more mandatory reporting and regulation around climate, around carbon emissions that's come into play. The EU has a corporate sustainability reporting disclosure requirement for all companies there. And both the UK and the US markets also have similar climate reporting. So I think really it's been driven by reporting and regulation increases.
Right, fantastic. And Charlotte, how are you seeing these evolving targets? Because what we've seen on the research side is that more companies are signing up to net zero targets, et cetera. How are you seeing it shape the way landlords and tenants and you as a landlord might work together to, to solve their problems and for your assets too?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when we look at reporting, we've got to think about what role do we play to make that a really easy and achievable thing for our tenants. Because if we look at even ASRS, that FY26 is the first time that will come into the Australian reporting requirements, being able to be set up and make sure that we can actually be a really easy conduit to provide the data is really essential for us. And so we're finding that there's a lot more conversations with our tenants around what their ambitions are, what their current requirements are, and we've got to think about how do we continue to set our buildings up for success that's going to meet their requirements, but also in the shorter term, making sure that we can meet their reporting requirements in a really easy way.
So that means a lot of measurement and technology.
Yeah, it's technology, it's measurement, it's data that we have been collecting. It's now about understanding which bits of the data set that tenants need and want to report on and will need to report on, and making sure that that's being able to be provided to them in a user-friendly way that meets all their needs.
And I think it also goes both ways as well. As a tenant in a Lendlease building, we want to collect your data so we can report on that, but equally you want to have some of the tenant's data.
Yeah.
So it really needs to go both ways.
Absolutely. I think, they become much more symbiotic, those relationships, as you're both having to report on each other's. And that linking is really critical. So I think for us, and it's, maybe it's overused a bit, but we all think about that partnership. How can we really partner with our tenant customers to make sure that we're providing what they need, they're giving us that, and together we're progressing in that really efficient and cohesive kind of manner.
I mean, and the other thing that we notice in the research data is there's a much more likely that office occupiers are reporting they need to have renewable energy sorted out by certain dates. Is that a new thing, or is that just...
Look, my view on that is I think as an office occupier, regardless of what industry you're in, you want to make an impact. And one of the easiest ways to make an impact is within your own office sort of footprint, let's say. If you're a mining company, you've got mines to worry about. If you're a tech company, you've got data centers to worry about. But within your office, you can make an impact there. So switching over to renewable energy is one of the easiest things you can do. You could do it in a day.
Yeah.
So I think there's more and more companies that are committing to that now, but it is easier to do.
Yeah. And we certainly took quite a portfolio approach when we thought about our renewable energy, making sure that we were able to use our scale to our advantage to be able to buy that in at sort of the right price. And, I'm not super technical, but I also understand that you've got to really think about the quality of the renewable energy. So how can you make sure that you can verify that as well sourced and truly renewable? And I think if you do that in pockets, you've got that sort of potential gap of quality or that lack of quality assurance. And so we've taken a very much a portfolio view to be able to provide that in a cost efficient manner, but also with that right level of integrity behind the renewable.
All right. So the other thing kind of that I think is worth unpacking is that we did look at the smaller tenant cohort. Yeah. Do you want to expand on what we're seeing with that group?
Sure. Yeah. So this time around we went a bit deeper. We didn't just take the largest tenants over 5,000. We went down to 1,000 or 1,500.
It was 1,000.
1,000 square meters. So a couple of takeaways from that group is, one, just because they're a small tenant here doesn't mean they're not part of a larger organization globally. And what sort of came out of the research was that there's a large proportion of them that do have net zero carbon targets. Yeah. My view would have been that if you're a smaller tenant, you don't have anything on your website, you don't have a sustainability resource or team, so therefore no commitments, but that wasn't the case. There are still a large proportion of them. And then I think the other thing is that they've also still got midterm or interim carbon targets as well as renewable energy targets as well. So similar consistency to some of the larger tenants.
And of course, I suppose the thing is, although they can't influence a landlord's strategy, they might choose to be aligned with a landlord that does have a strategy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even smaller tenants can really see that there's value in honouring sustainability targets and meeting those. It's an attractor to new entrants in the workplace for sure, I think.
Okay, so now let's talk about regulation and reporting impact. And we've touched on it a little bit as we've gone through. I think the regulatory environment seems to be accelerating. Perhaps, Connor, you can explain what the key changes have been and where we're going with it.
The big one on everyone's lip, and I'm sort of living and breathing this day to day, is the mandatory sustainability reporting, or ASRS, that came into effect on the 1st of Jan 2025. So, over the next 3 years, we're going to see over 6,000 corporates reporting some of them for the first time, around climate, carbon emissions. And the main changes really between what's happened before and now is that it's now a mandatory requirement. So before, any reporting by large corporates was on a voluntary basis. There's going to be a lot more consistency. Before, companies could choose which framework or the way they wanted to disclose their carbon emissions, and now that can be done in a very consistent way. And then the final part is the level of assurance. So before, again, it was voluntary to get assurance, but now it becomes mandatory. So limited assurance for year one for some aspects, and then that moves to full reasonable assurance by 2030.
Which has got to be extremely significant for a landlord and the occupiers. We've touched on a little bit, but I can imagine there's a huge range in offerings around landlords and their capability to help tenants report.
Yeah. We certainly are seeing that in a few of the, larger tenants start to report sooner. And we're a few weeks into the new financial year. But they've been really gearing up for that. And that's been, I guess, because it hasn't been on scale, we've really had those very much one-on-one tailored conversations with those tenants that are going to need to report to find the ways in which to deliver that information, but also make sure that we're providing the details that they require. But when you start to step that out and think about, well, who comes under the purview in the FY27 or FY28, it really does become a much wider service. And so for us, or a wider scope. So for us, we've been really thinking about how do we use and create the framework that we already have in place. And for us, through our Eco Concierge service, where we're really thinking that that's kind of the pivotal point of contact in our building framework to be able to have those conversations with our tenants around, here's the data, here's where you can access more, what are your requirements, how can we sort of make that fit? So we're really hoping that we've sort of built the scaffold, and as additional reporting requirements happen, and no doubt we're just at the start of it. So what we're reporting on today could grow, not just in scope of who's involved in it, but what gets reported. We just need to make sure that we have the right framework there to continue to meet that changing environment.
Yeah. And of course, the whole point is to reduce emissions. So let's get on to how the market performs for the better rated assets. And in a minute, we'll also tackle the move to electrification. But let's start first off by looking at the highly rated neighbours assets, which is the 5.5-star plus assets. That's what we've decided is the key benchmark to try and get over for this measurement. And certainly if you look at the research numbers, what we've seen over time is that vacancy for the better assets, the 5.5-star assets and above, has over the last 2 years, the difference between those assets and the wider market has widened. So you end up with, for example, the 5.5-star assets across our CBD markets with 5% less vacancy than the wider market. Now that's material in a situation where CBD markets are challenged with high vacancy across the board. The rental story is a little bit more complex. The premium is not quite there, and we'll unpack that a little bit as we go forward. But the yield premium has been very consistent for some time until more recently. So let's unpack some of those factors. The first thing is outperformance in rents. Are we seeing outperformance? And the answer is the 5.5-star assets don't actually outperform the wider market at the moment. And I mean, Charlotte, maybe you could have a view on why we think that is.
Yeah. Well, I think if you just look at, there's lots of factors that go into what makes up a rent profile. And I think that the 5.5-star target or the 5.5-star rating is going to be an important basis of that.
I should point out that the 4.5 and 5-star do outperform the wider market.
I'd say there's also, we'll probably come to this a bit later with the increase in supply of some of these more efficient buildings, but there's also a lag with neighbours. You have to have, once you've repositioned an asset or have a new development, there's a 12-month gap before that rating comes on board. So I think that would play into some of the results we're seeing as well.
I mean, so when we finalise this research, I think that the rental premium would be the most interesting one. The yield premium is fairly clear. Once you've spent the capex, you've done the conversion, the upgrading of the assets, there's a yield premium in terms of 40 basis points has been consistently for the last couple of years, which is understandable from a landlord's point of view. Once the money's been spent, you've de-risked the asset.
Yeah. And I guess that point around, some tenants may view 4.5 or 5 star as okay. And then maybe it's the pathway to electrification that's more attractive to a tenant perspective. But I think the outperformance in vacancy, that's a real driver.
Is a real driver, isn't it?
And, that downtime and not having that vacancy sit there sort of translate to a rental premium because you're achieving 5% more naturally because you're 5% fuller. So I think there is maybe a little bit of tenants aren't paying more for it, but they're shortlisting that asset a lot faster, or it's attractive to a wider pool of tenants, and therefore it's not sitting vacant as long as maybe some of the other offerings in the market.
The other thing I'd add to it as well with that, the 5.5 sort of watermark is what the net zero and government operations strategy did. So I think, when that came in last year and the federal government committed to being in, from 1 July 25 to being in 5.5 star buildings, that really increased what corporates were asking for as well. So,
it's a good point. It's an element of regulation, but it's actually from an occupier, a government occupier lens.
And we saw that 15 years ago with, when they introduced a 4.5 star neighbours requirement, that became the proxy in the market for a good building. And so I think, that's kind of the government drawing a line in the sand or making a position that isn't saying that's what creates that good building, but it's certainly what other tenants look to and think, well, if that's what they're doing, perhaps that's what we should be doing.
Okay, so we're seeing a measure of, outperformance for these highly sustainable assets. Is sustainability alone enough to secure leasing success, or are there other factors? I think we all know the answer to this one.
Yes.
Sustainability alone?
Yeah.
No.
Nice try, Connor. Yeah. Tim O'Connell will be looking to recruit you into his leasing team if that was the case.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I think there's so many things that go into the mix, but what we're finding, like some of our research is sustainability is once again one of those top performing factors. I think maybe there were a few years where it was a bit more business as usual, just kind of take it as read. And now it's a lot broader, the conversation. I'd say also the conversation around social sustainability is really increasing as well in that space, that tenants really want to know, what you're doing with some social good as well.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of factors that go into what makes a building successful. And at the moment, we're really seeing that, the pool of the precinct, we're really seeing that core, great located, well amenitized precincts are doing really well. But one thing we have also observed from some tenant data that we've had is that everything's becoming more important. So when you look at those sort of top drivers, there's very little spread between what those, top 4 or 5 drivers are. And I think that's also, when we start to discuss that in a bit more detail with some of our tenants, we think it's just that everything's a bit more important. This return to office
is part of it.
It's part of it.
It's part of it.
Yeah. And workers for the first time, really can vote with their feet each day. It's a bit rainy, a bit gloomy, put your Ugg boots on and stay home. What's actually going to pull you back to the office? And, the mentality around, 10 years ago, you'd sign a lease somewhere and that's just where your workers would turn up every day. Now there's a lot more into how do we encourage that back? How do we make it a vibrant and exciting place? And I think our role as, landlord is to help do some of that heavy lifting, especially for our, some of our smaller tenants really do look to us to do that. So I think there's a lot more pressure on those corporate real estate teams who are in turn sort of our clients to really make sure we lift the overall experience. But I would definitely say sustainability as one of those conversations.
Right up there.
There.
Yeah, it's risen up the ranks. And I think like the last point I make on that is around what I'm deeming like sustainability literacy. I think a lot of companies now have had their goals, they've had their targets for a long time. And hopefully the likes of me and the rest of my cohort in the sustainability sector have helped educate, the people within their organizations. And then, whether that's also tenant reps and leasing agents and others in the real estate sector. So the types of questions they're asking of landlords, and others has improved, and that's helped to put it higher up on the agenda.
Okay, so now this is one of the most interesting parts of this new update to this report, which is the is the understanding of what's happening with the electrification of assets. Because when we did this report initially in 2023, there simply wasn't anything to talk about in our core markets, but that has changed. So the first thing, Connor, I think, can we explain what we did in this process and what was the definition we used for electrified assets?
Yeah. So last time there weren't many all electric assets out there, but this time we decided to go out to the research database. So all of the landlords and REITs that we have on our research list and ask them a question. And that question was, can you tell us which of your buildings are all electric? And that definition we used was a link to the Green Building Council of Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, all electric building is one that is fossil fuel free. So it's taken out any gas use for heating, hot water. If there is a diesel generator still in there for backup purposes, we kept that in. But that's the definition we used. And the process we went through was to send out a survey to all landlords, and we got some great responses.
We got some great responses. And I think the thing that we as researchers have found is that you've gone from one or two options in Melbourne and Sydney to, about 12 in Sydney and Melbourne by 2020, by middle of this year, really. And there are a few that are under construction, but the influence of those assets is already taking place.
Yeah, I think to dive into that a bit more, there's sort of three different types. There's the new developments that have come out of the ground and are now all electric, and there's some few examples of those in both Sydney and Melbourne. We also found some other older assets that we weren't aware of that I guess we didn't pick up last time that are all electric and have been since they were built. And then there's some repositioned assets as well. Most of those have come out of Melbourne, but there are some in Sydney.
So what's behind the growth, do we think? I mean, what is behind it?
Yeah, I think we've touched on a few of them. One of them is the tenant demand.
Yep.
I think tenants and through those leasing negotiations are driving that. And I think, the technology piece is there now as well. Before, if you were designing a building to be all electric, there was a lot of confusion and not as much interest in doing it. But now with the use of heat pumps and others, that's lit it up. Yeah.
I think there's also some there's definitely investor appetite for that, to really think about, they want to invest in assets and have funds that have those attributes. So I think that then helps the case to do it. It's definitely seemingly getting a little bit easier. I mean, as you say, with lights of heat pumps and stuff, but I think there's still a lot of complexity around how does it work in each individual building, and how does it work from a spatial point of view? How do you take out the equipment? How do you put in the new equipment? And also, when do you do that in a way that makes sense? So, very conscious
that
of.
was my question. How do you decide? Say most landlords are saying, well, electrification, we've got to do it at some point. How do you decide when?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think age, life cycle of the equipment that you need to take out is really critical.
So you're not going to replace it.
So, when are you going to replace it anyway?
Yeah.
And if you only did it a year ago, then throwing that out doesn't really seem that sustainable for other reasons. So finding the right time in the life cycle assessment of the equipment. It's also around, who are your tenants? When are their key lease renewals? And also, who are your target tenants? If you know that you're going to be wanting to attract tenants and coinciding that with a repositioning of the asset or some vacancy, then it becomes a sort of a much simpler justification. And then I think, usually it's a portfolio of assets that, a fund is looking at one time. So it's then prioritizing that in terms of which ones go first. And that's around that return, the timing of key tenant decision making, and the timing of equipment as well.
Has access to capital come into it?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's definitely a factor. We're always, really conscious to make sure that if we're using capital, we're using it efficiently, we're getting a return on it as fast as possible. So when we're assessing that potentially in a fund between two assets, which one goes first, you sort of want to do the one that's going to give you a higher return sooner. And some markets will just really demand it, faster than other repositioned assets.
Yeah, I suppose what the research obviously identifies is that there's a a supply and demand imbalance.
Mm.
You know, we've got a current shortage of highly sustainable and electrified assets. Will this drive retrofits? Can it accelerate that activity or stimulate new builds, or both?
I'm thinking both. And it also depends on which market we're talking about. In Sydney, there's still a lot of potential for development. I think there's a lot of overstation development that's still at play. So, if you're designing a new build now, it's definitely going to be all electric. And then in other markets, so in Victoria and ACT, they're ruling out the use of any new sort of gas connections for buildings as well. But then there's also opportunity for, and I think more broadly what we'll see over the next 5, 10, 15 years is the repositioning of older assets. So I think there still will be both. There will be new developments and repositioned assets.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you're just waiting for new developments to solve all of it, you'll still have a real gap between the supply of assets with net zero carbon and those tenants that have those goals. So I think you'd still would have a mismatch of supply and demand in that equation. So retrofitting becomes obviously a big part of the overall conversation.
I mean, obviously, it's a very difficult environment to build right now. So it certainly plays to the idea of existing assets that are already electrified and highly sustainable. So the early mover premium, which we talk about all the time, how long will it last before market parity?
It'd be good to have a crystal ball to know the exact right moment that is the right time. I mean, I think like all these things, it will become more marked into market practice, and then it's just normalized, and then potentially moving then to a brown discount rather than any premium. Given how quickly we've gone from having 1 or 2 all electric assets in a market to having 12, maybe it's faster than we think. But I'm not sure of what time frame I'd put on that.
I think it's speeding up for sure. We've seen a big change in the last 18 months. The other factor is around net zero commitments or net zero carbon commitments. A lot of companies have a 50% reduction by 2030 sort of baked into those. So, whether you're on the investor, the landlord side, and you want to see quick decarbonisation, that's an easy way to do it. Or if you're a tenant as well. Yeah, roughly 2030, I think is, if you're
Real
trying to do it
crunch.
after that,
Yes.
if after that time, I think you're not an early mover. You've really sort of got this windows for the next few years. And the other consideration is, once you get past that 2030, it's going to be harder and harder and more costly to maintain gas networks. So that's when we start getting into that sort of stranded area for assets as well.
Yes. The rising, cost of maintaining the gas networks. Yeah, absolutely. Key takeaways and advice to finish up now. For landlords, electrification is becoming essential.
Yes.
Yes. And we're aligning upgrades with equipment life cycle and marketing. Any further thoughts from a landlord's perspective?
I think it's really important to have a pathway, even if you don't know exactly when it's going to happen, or you don't know everything or when that capital will be available. Really making sure that for each of your assets, having that clear, structured pathway of what could electrification look like and how you're going to get there. I think that really aids a lot of conversations, especially with tenants, to make sure you have a sort of roadmap. I think that's been really helpful for us in terms of planning how we might roll that out.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think it's having a plan, making sure it's communicated really clearly to the tenants, and an example of that is with the government requirements that are in play now. When they're looking for space, there aren't enough 5.5-star rated buildings for them to move into. So if you have a plan either for electrification or to improve the performance of that asset from, say, a 4 or 4.5 to a 5.5, be really clear on what that plan is. And then when that gets submitted to the government or the Department of Finance, they can put that in there for a reasoning and really show what that pathway is going to be for them to achieve their sustainability targets.
So you can basically you can plan it along with your tenant cohort to align with their targets. Yeah. So what would be the top message for tenants and what should they be prioritising when they in their building selection processes?
The first one is energy efficiency for me. I think with an energy efficient building and a fit out, that's going to really hopefully drive down your operational costs and help you achieve your targets in the lowest cost way. Beyond that, it's the embodied carbon. I think you can, as an occupier, if you're moving to a new office, that's really sending a market signal that a new building. A new building. That's sending a market signal out, and we're seeing some large corporates in Sydney and Melbourne consider staying in older assets that want to be repositioned, so that there isn't that additional upfront embodied carbon. So I think there'll be an option for companies to make that decision, as well as what their fit out will bring to it as well. So if they're working with the landlord, making sure it is a sustainable fit out as possible and looking at low carbon materials.
Do you have any thoughts for the tenants that you come across with?
I think it's about choosing a partnership that can really work with you on your whole of life story around sustainability. And I think trying to choose those landlords that will partner with you and can bring, some of their learnings. I don't think anyone comes with all the solutions. I don't think anyone's got kind of everything just neatly wrapped up. But I think it's about that right attitude of partnership and really working out where things change, how you can move together to both still get your needs aligned and met.
In closing, I just want to say that what we've found, I think, is really encouraging, that the market is embracing the shift towards a net zero world. And it's happening, I think, faster than many of us perhaps thought it would be happening. And it's a positive to see that tenants, landlords are all moving in the same direction, and that we can see a premium for those that go down the path, which is really encouraging. Thank you both for joining us today. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Connor, for joining this JLL Perspective podcast. And I invite everyone here, our listeners, to look on the JLL website for further insights on office markets, on sustainability, and to download reports. So,
thanks, Annabel.
Thank you.
Thanks, Annabel.
Thank you.